Yeah, we're live. Excuse me. 3:29 in the afternoon. How's everybody doing? For today, what I want to talk about is, and this is an interesting thing because we this is one of the things that on the surface seems like a no-brainer, right? It seems like it's like very black and white, very cut and dry. But the reality is it's not. It's like a headline thing. We look at the headline and that's very, very obvious, but it's not. So the question is, when we're taking a look at we'll look at the LS family, but you could extrapolate this to the other engine families and stuff too. But on the LS specifically, we have the smaller bore stuff, which is the 4.8 and 5.3, and then we have the kind of medium-sized bore, I guess, in the LS1, and then 4-inch bore stuff in the 6-liter 4065, and then 4125 stuff. So we're not going to talk about 4125 stuff because that's going to be specific to that because the different valve positions that they use in an LS7 head and because they're big. But the other ones, an LS3 stuff, unfortunately for us, LS3 stuff doesn't really carry over. It does carry over down a little bit. You can run LS3 on LS7, you can run LS3 on 6-liter, but not on any of the smaller ones. But that still leaves us with a whole bunch of stuff to talk about from 6-liter stuff on down. So we know from unlimited amount of airflow testing that if we airflow test a cylinder head, we test it on a 4-inch bore or a 4030 bore, and then we flow test it on a 3780 bore or a 3810 bore if we want to go 30 over on that. If we test it on the bigger bore, the head flows slightly more than it does on a smaller bore. We know that that's the case because we've done it enough. So the question then, if we want to talk about, can you run one of these heads that's designed for a 4-inch bore on a 3780 bore? We know that the answer should be yes. The reason that we know it's yes is because the OEMs, GM already does that. They run the 6-liter head on the 5.3 and on the 4.8. You can put a 243 or a 799 head that's designed as honestly, on the 243, they ran it on a 5.7 also. So it's been on, that 243 head has basically been on a 6-liter, a 5.7, and a 5.3. I don't know if they put them, those are the 799s. Maybe they put them on the 4.8s also. But it's the same bore size, so it doesn't really matter. It's just a change in stroke for that one. But so we know that head, even though and this is one thing a lot of guys may not know, is that the chamber size on that, it's a little bit bigger than a 706 or an 862 head on a 243 or a 799 head. It's a little bit bigger volume-wise. But more importantly for this discussion, it's also bigger on inside diameter. So that bore size is bigger than the bore is on these smaller bore 4.8 and 5.3 motors. So the bore size of the chamber overhangs the bore of the block. So you would think right away, oh, well, that's got to be terrible for flow, right? Because the valve opens up and it's hitting the edge of the bore, hitting the gasket. If the gasket is the same size, most times you make the gasket size the size of the combustion chamber and not the size of the bore. It's something we go through all the time with combustion chambers on big block Chevys. The combustion chamber is almost always bigger, and sometimes by quite a bit bigger than the bore size is of the block on big block Chevys. But on the LS, this is certainly the case. And so we can run these 6-liter heads on the 4.8 and 5.3, and obviously the factory does it, and we know that it works. We know that the motor runs, and in fact, you'll get guys that will argue with me all the time. When I did the test, the comparison of all of the stock heads, we did a 706 and a 241, a 317, and a 799 head on a 5.3, and the smaller bore 706 head made more power. Okay, well, that's just compression. Okay, well, you can, if that's your defense, that's fine. But also the 706 head and the 862 head have the same size combustion chamber as that bore size. So do we have turbulence going on there also? And not to mention the fact that it has different size valves and different port volumes, and there are other differences as well. But the thing is, can we run these bigger bore heads on these smaller motors. And then what happens? So what happens if we take the next step up? So what happens if we run like an aftermarket head, an airflow research head, like a 230 head, a trick flow 215 or a 225 head, something that where these heads were definitely designed for these bigger bore motors? What happens if we run them on these small bore motors? What happens to the airflow? Well, we know from past flow testing that they don't flow as much on that smaller bore as they do on the bigger bore. So does that mean it creates all sorts of like turbulence and eddies and flow, and it's just going to work terribly? The answer to that is no. It actually works very well. And people will argue, and I'm sure we'll get comments in this video after this video is over. We will get comments about people saying, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't run that because that's the bore's too, the head's designed for a bigger bore. It flows terrible. You're just robbing it of all the power." No, you're not. So if we start thinking about this logically, if we put a cylinder head that flows 300 CFM or even more than that, 320 CFM, flows that on a 4-inch bore, how much less is it going to flow on a 3780 bore? If we test it on a flow bench and floated it, let's say we floated at 315 CFM on a 4-inch bore, what do you think it's going to flow on a 3780? Like how much less? How much worse does it get on the smaller bore? It's actually not very much. But that's even not the point. How much ever you lose on a flow bench, that's also not going to tell you what you lose in terms of power. And the reason for that, and this is the reading past the headline part, is that if we take these cylinder heads, if we take a cylinder head that flows, let's say we went from 320 CFM to 300 CFM, and we're putting it on a 5.3 that makes less than 500 horsepower. It has an extra 100 horsepower worth of head flow to still be available to it. Even if it flows less on the smaller bore, it's got way more head flow than it can use. So it has excess head flow, even though it's not optimum because of the chamber size and the valve size relative to the bore size of the motor. Even if we lose flow because of putting the wrong head on the wrong block, it still works. As long as the valve doesn't come down and hit the edge of the block, like we saw with trying to put LS3 heads on a 5.3 or a 4.8 bore size block, where the valve actually comes down and hits the side of the block or hits the top of the block. You don't want that to happen because you'll damage the motor, certainly the cylinder heads and probably the pistons and probably everything immediately if you try to run it like that. So that would definitely be bad. But I'm not talking about that situation. I'm talking about a situation where we just have an overhang of combustion chamber size relative to the bore. But the thing is, we still have a lot of flow. And not only do we have a lot of flow, we have an excess amount of flow because we're going from a head that flows, let's say 240 CFM to something that still probably flows 290 or 300 CFM. Even in the restricted bore size, it's still going to work great. And logically that makes sense. But when we back this up with the fact that I have personally run 215 trick flow heads and 225 trick flow heads and ported 799 heads and ported 317 heads on these small bore motors and had it work just fine. And in a lot of these cases, it wasn't because I used all of the logic that we just went over just now. It was because we just tried it and to see what happens. And sometimes science is like that. Okay, well, sometimes it's better that you don't know any better. And then you just try it and go, hey, look, everyone told me that this can't work. And yet it does work because we know that it does work because now we've tried it. And not only have I tried it one time, we've tried it many, many times and we know that it works. And also, like I said, if you took a 799 or a 243 head, we know that the factory put them on these motors. So if we put a ported version of that, it would flow even more. And then most times guys put bigger valves in them. As long as the bigger valve that they put in there wasn't a problem with actually physical interference and you improve the airflow, that's going to be better because the airflow is probably not going to be hurt very much until the top of the lift range when the valve is in one particular lift position. At 100 lift, you might not change it at all. At 50, you might not change it. At 100 or 200, maybe you don't start changing until 3 or 4 or 500 lift. Maybe you only have a 550 lift cam, so you're in a range where you're not being hurt at all. And so I just want people to realize, and the reason for this is I get lots of questions about, hey, I've got some whatever trick flow. What normally happens is people will go to look on the Summit website or the Airflow Research website or the Brian Tooley Racing website or wherever, and they'll look and go, okay, these heads it says that these heads are for this bore size. Okay, yeah, a 215 head is a really good head for a 5.7 or a 6-liter, deal. But will it work? Because they've said that, they think that it won't work on a 4.8 or 5.3. Now, whether or not you have a combination that's taking advantage of all of the airflow that 215 trick flow head or a 230 airflow head, that all of the airflow potential that those heads have to offer, that's another question. But it will physically work, and you will be able to make a lot of power because you'll have a whole bunch of extra airflow now that you can play with. But now because you have a smaller displacement motor, now you have to get enough camshaft, enough compression, enough intake manifold to utilize what the head has to offer. And in most cases, on a 4.8 and a 5.3, that's normally the problem. It's like putting a set of ported LS3 heads on a stock displacement LS3. It's really hard to build an LS3 to take advantage of a cylinder head that might flow 350 or 360 or 370 CFM. Are you really going to make an LS3 stock displacement LS3? And certainly not a stock bottom end deal is never going to be able to make 740 or 750 horsepower. I shouldn't say never. I've never seen one. So if somebody did, congratulations to you. I don't know how they would do that on a stock bottom end, because you don't have enough camshaft to do that. But again, and this is a nice problem to have, where we have way too much cylinder head, even if we have these small bore motors. So don't be afraid to use these, this more head flow stuff. And for years and years, obviously, I've been talking about, okay, do a set of total engine airflow ported 706 heads or 862 heads, do a set of 205 trick flow heads. Somebody has one of these small bore heads that's designed for that. They work really well. But you can also use these other ones, and obviously they will work. Let's see here. We're going to start a poll. Okay, would you run TFS 225 head designed for the 6-liter bore size on your 5.3? Would you do that? Could you, if you please? There, Eric, David, what's going on? Caught one at the start. Yes, thanks for talking about this. Yeah, it's, and these are the things, these kinds of questions are the reason why I do a lot of the testing that I do. Because you have to take it beyond just the normal, headline title, common sense level of things, and go, look, this actually works. This was the same impetus for the Big Bang stuff. Oh, you can't run more than 10 pounds. Those will break. Okay. I'm pretty sure that that's not the case. I don't know where beyond 10 it is. As it turns out, it's double or triple that. But it's way beyond that. And because the motor doesn't know what boost is, it doesn't care. It knows what detonation is, though, but it doesn't know what boost is. And so if you do it correctly, you can get away with a lot more than you think. And as it turned out, we got away with a whole bunch. And guys were already doing that even before I did the Big Bang. But, you have to look at this stuff and go, okay, look, yeah, I understand the internet level of logic for that. But what happens if we try this and let's see what happens. And then we become, as a group, we become more knowledgeable, and we have more options that way. We can grab stuff and put it on there and make it work. Gregory Austin, what's going on? I got small bore heads on my big cubic inch stroker. Won't run any faster. I got a Ford 6-inch rotted 406 220 Flowtech heads that flow 315. There we go. I'm sure that is that a small block Chevy? Is that what that is? Quench that allows compression, hard to achieve on a big chamber. Should flow the same. Or is that, I'm sure that comment was on the different bore sizes, but it doesn't flow the same if you flow it on a different bore size. If a head flows enough with smaller ports, is it worth porting to save weight? you want to port it to knock weight out of it? That's a lot of porting. The head flows 300 CFM. It has 300 CFM on everything. It doesn't. Have you flowed it on different bore sizes? We got a few minutes before you go to class. Isn't this an RPM dependent comparison? No. Whether the head fits or not and goes on there has nothing to do with RPM. What supercharger would be good for making 8 to 10 pounds of boost on a 383 480 horsepower motor that would be able to grow with me if I ever go to a 421 and 20 pounds of boost? What motor is this, and what fuel are you using, and how much power do you want to make? Are 195 ASCAS heads small for a 383 stroker? It depends on, they would be small for a 383 stroker that you're trying to make 900 horsepower NA with, but not on one that you're trying to make 400 or 500 horsepower with. Wouldn't the cylinder wall shroud the valve to some extent? Yeah, that's what we just covered. In your opinion, is the gas, ethanol, methanol mixture worth the effort? Ethanol just to help the gas and methanol blend. Comes out as a similar stoip to E85, but theory has better octane cooling. If I had E85 available, I would just do that rather than trying to custom mix stuff. Let's see. Depending on cam, they will make 500 to 600 horsepower. I like engines that are overbuilt and underflowed for longevity, like the 460. Like a 464, do you mean? Velocity versus volume, which is better? How are you going to pick one of those over the other? Because you're always going to have both of those. Velocity on NA, volume on boost. No, you don't pick one or the other. That's not the way it works. It's like, oh, what's better, lift or duration? You need both of them. It's like running a stock throttle body with a ported intake and heads. You're choking it down. If you jump off a diving board, I'd say the volume of the pool is important. And if you jump off a really, really high diving board, then that would be the velocity, Neil. Should cam lift be matched to the head flow max CFM at its rated lift? No, and that's actually very rarely is that the case. If a guy has a 620 lift cam, you have lots of stuff where guys are running 550 lift cams on heads that continue to flow past 600, and vice versa. You can continue to make power even if your head stalls at 600 and you put a 650 or 700 lift cam in it. It still can make power. This is the earliest I've seen the late one. Well, we're doing a late one also, Scott. In what scenario would extra flow capability hurt power output? We've seen instances where port volume and even if there's an attending slight increase in flow can sometimes hurt power somewhere else. Not normally peak power though. A 5.3, I wouldn't be buying aftermarket heads. I'd be buying a turbo. Yeah, that's an easy way to solve that also. And I also wanted to mention tonight, I'm going to be doing something on cylinder heads. We have 706, 799, 821, and the Trick Flow 225 heads all on the 6 liter so that they'll all be in one place at one time. So you can kind of see, and we'll go over the individual gains and then also the fast manifold too, which is all, all good stuff. And we'll have graphs and everything for tonight, so we'll be throwing the kitchen sink at it. There. Turbos, as you increase boost, how high do inside cylinder temperatures increase? you could theoretically have the same temperature in the combustion chamber, if that's what you're talking about, depending on what your mixture of timing and fuel is and how well your intercooler is working. What I want to know is if you had 243s milled to 61.5 and 862s with identical valves as the 243s, what would the dyno say on each bore size? So, so you want to modify both heads and then test them on 2 motors? Why would you care about something that specific? Wonder if the edge of the bore on a small bore, big chamber head could actually make the mixture more homogeneous and burn more efficient. I don't know. And then we could wonder, like they do with the big block, where they notch the bore on the 396 for the big valve head. Like you could notch the bore, like we were trying to notch the bore to get an LS7 or an LS3 head to fit on the small bore. Could that work also? It didn't work on the there wasn't enough room to do it for the altered valve position on the LS3 head, but they did that on big blocks, on the small bore big block stuff. Rover's in the house. I'm looking at getting some 235s for a 3905/4. I want all the port velocity. Okay. What cam for low RPM torque monster NA53? Yeah, Colt, go to richardholdnerperformance.com and you should get a low buck truck. BTR torque cam, although most guys want more power than that. Richard, love the channel and I learned a ton. I have a 15 Sierra HD with a 6.0 and 823 heads. It's all stock. How come it seems no one talks about 823 heads? Or are they not as popular? Yeah, it's a rec port head. It's the same as all the other heads. I'm going to be testing that motor. I mean, this was an LY6, so very, very similar. I'm going to be testing those heads and comparing them to these other heads tonight on the live feed. But those heads work good. They flow over 300 CFM, and they can support a lot of power. They're better than all the factory cathedral port heads, and in terms of peak power. 2-inch, 240, a 255 intake valve, and a stock 706 head on a 5.3. When is an oversized hone required for one of these valves? When will the valve hit the bore? Is that what you're talking about? Ever try or see reverse quench pistons and head combinations? I think they're promoted by TFS. I'm not familiar with that. Cross-sectional area is what I've always started with when deciding on aftermarket heads. Valve size next to make sure it will clear the bore without shrouding. What route would you go for intake and fuel delivery on a street strip 383, 10.5 to 1, 570 lift? I need to know I need to know what the duration is, and I need to know what your desired power output is. But for street, I'm still leaning toward a dual plane, an RPM air gap. LQ4 stock, rotating assembly, Summit 64 cathedral heads, good cam for low end torque. Go to richardholdnerperformance.com and you can look at a low buck truck camshaft. A truck Norris cam, a Chupacabra, all of those are going to be similar. Mine's just cost less. And if you go to richardholdnerperformance.com, I think we have, well, there's a video up on the channel of me running it on a 6-liter, so you can kind of see what it does on a 6-liter. I want low end torque and MPGs. I'm going to be running AFR 230s on a stock bottom end ProCharge LQ4. Okay. Yeah, Richard, if you have a cam in that, that's going to make a lot of power, depending on which ProCharger you have. I mean, all of them are good, but some of them can make lots and lots of power. I've had these heads on 3 motors on a 408, on a 413, and a 450. The heads run the same time on each motor. They flow 300 CFM, and damn sure won't no more go through them for more horsepower. I don't understand why a 450-inch motor makes the same power as a 408. It should, even if you were somehow to magically clip it at, let's say it was 600 horsepower. I don't know what the rest of the combination is, but let's say that we have an imaginary 600 horsepower. A 450-inch motor is going to still have way more average power than a 408. Did some research on Marketplace. All the 6 liters are $1,200. If you reach terminal velocity, I don't think the depth of the pool will help. Yeah, probably not. I'll burn up on re-entry. I would think velocity on a street engine would be a better benefit than maximum flow. And people get confused about what cylinder heads do when they're looking at flow relative to what they think the effect it has on the torque curve. Because people think that smaller port heads make more torque, and that's not the case. I have an L76 6-liter with sloppy stage 2. How much CFM carburetor would I need? I think I would put a 750 on it. LT53 has 248cc runners, so clearly GM has the same idea. Yeah, look at what they did on the LS3. The math of 6-liter times RPM is how many cubic feet, and there you go. No, you don't pick carburetor size by displacement. Well, you can. I don't. My ported Super Duty 4 head on my Super Duty Iron Duke would flow identical 245 CFM at 600. Identical to what? So what are the best aftermarket heads to throw on a 4.8? There's no best. You got to just tell me what you're trying to achieve, and I can steer you in the right direction. Low RPM torque is a double-edged sword. You can add boost, but you can get into the danger zone. For the poll, does that combo run more risk of head gasket failure? Does what run more of a risk of head gasket failure? Now, that's not an issue because the sealing surface is still the same. What's the most fuel efficient setup? Probably a tuned stock cam would be the most fuel efficient at cruise. Almost got the daily GXP back together, Frank. Should be the first startup with your low buck truck, as long as I remember how to HP tuners. Let me know after you get it tuned. Everybody here they want idle clips, man. I'm searching for a good cam like a sloppy stage 2, LQ4, 6-liter stock bottom end with a deck 799, 035. Everyone has seemed to try to buy a cam says I may have piston to valve issues. You won't have piston to valve issues. Not on an LQ4 stock bottom end with a sloppy stage 2 cam. You have miles of clearance for that, even if you've milled the heads. We have a camshaft on the 5.3 that has a flat top piston. It doesn't really change piston to valve clearance, but we've milled them 30, and we have a much bigger camshaft than that in it. So you're fine. That's not the cam I would pick. The sloppy stage 2 is not the cam I would pick if you haven't picked a cam, but if you do pick that camshaft and get the Elgin one, but it's going to fit fine. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. That's right. Scott, now there's 55 of those. For the science of it, plus 862s are way cheaper. I only see one like. How can those of us who don't have access to the dyno have a chance of not melting parts under boost? You just have to have it tuned properly. You don't need a dyno to do that. You just need an air fuel meter. And be real conservative on your timing. Just ordered a can from you a day ago. It's a good cost-friendly setup, 80-pound injectors. Jason, we have injectors there that work with the truck manifold. We have 80s and we have 1000s. And if you're going to get, you should just get the 1000s so that you could also, if you wanted to, run E85. We have pumps and injectors on sale now. No matter what, always check piston valve clearance when you start getting up there in cam size. All the popular brands have extra valve clearance cams. Yeah, a 228, 230 cam is not going to have piston to valve issues. It's all theory until you do it. Yeah, we got to try it, man, right? Just try it and let's show up and see what happens. D1X, okay, 232, 240 cam. Okay, yeah, that's good. Hopefully 1,000 horsepower. This Pro Charger made 18 PSI on my LS3. Yeah, a D1X will get to 1,000 horsepower. That'll be near all of it. We've done 1,000 with a D1 SC, but I think that was all of it. What kind of power should I see with a stock Gen 3 5.3 Richards Lowbuck truck cam? Yeah, you can't put 823 heads on it. That's for sure. Not on a 5.3. You can put 862s or 706 heads on it, but a 5.3 with stock heads and a truck manifold and headers and stuff is about, it's over 400, so 415 or 420, something like that. Building at the flywheel, the way that we test it. Building a 5.3, looking for 450 horsepower, planning on Trailblazer SS, 706s with mild port, flat top pistons, milled 28. Okay, so you need you could probably get there with my Truck Plus camshaft or like a BTR hot rod cam. Either one of those will get 450 at the flywheel, not at the wheels. You're not going to get 450 at the wheels. Building a Gen 3 Hemi, 13-1, 440. Oh, those are good heads. AFR CNC heads, 624 lift cam. I don't know what I need the other specs on the camshaft. You got enough cylinder head to make a lot of power though. Hopefully you have a good intake manifold on it. Building a 5.3 L83 stock bottom end BTR cam Whipple 3-liter converter headers, LT4 pump and injectors. Drop in Deutsch 400 pump. Question is, should I change valves and to what material? Otherwise, they're stock L83 heads. I don't know if you're going to have a valve problem. What you're going to have is, and I'm sure that the BTR guys told you this, I don't know which cam you got to be concerned with piston to valve clearance on L83. They have the least amount of piston to valve clearance of any of the LT family. So make sure that that's taken care of. And then, I don't know, maybe ask the BTR guys. I don't know if they've changed injector or valve material on that. I haven't seen that. I would be more interested in porting those. Are there any benefits of running a 4.8 over a 5.3 that's been shown on the dynograph since it's able to rev higher? It's not able to rev higher. That's a myth. There's no benefit of the 4.8 because it makes less power everywhere. It's just smaller. Same thing with a 4.8 or a 5.3 and a 6.0. A 6.0 is just a bigger motor. It makes more power. I love all these low RPM power boost torque comments. I knew that you would. I would think because the smaller flow heads make less power, the torque peak is more pronounced feeling, so it feels like it makes more torque. I haven't seen cylinder heads make a significant change in like making more torque than another set of heads. I've seen it be better everywhere. Like if you take a set of small block Chevy heads, like an iron head, and throw them in the garbage where they belong and put an airflow research head on it, it's better everywhere. It's better from the bottom to the top, in the middle. It makes more horsepower. It makes more torque. It makes more of everything because it's just such a way better cylinder head. And so we see that on most heads. But then people, what they want to know is, okay, well, what happens if I go way too far? Well, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't try to put a pro stock head on a 5.3 LS or a 350 Chevy because it doesn't belong there. And you could ruin your combination, I guess, by putting a 5 or 6 or 700 CFM head on there. Nobody would ever do that. So it's just kind of a funny talking point. But it's you have to take it to a range that's just not even really realistic. What's the intake valve size limit on a stock 706 head? Guys do 2-inch and 202 stuff, and I think that I thought it was 2055 is what people would put in them when Brian Tooley did the total engine airflow stuff. But the 706 head may not have been that big, but it's more than 2-inch though. I'm scrolling back. I went too far. High lift, short duration cam on a stock 906 versus port matched head on a Mopar 383 stock compression, stock RPM range. I don't really understand what you're asking there. If you watch Marketplace long enough, you can get a 6.0 short block for $300 or $400. I hope there's some burnout clips after the break-in. Oh, there you go. Those are always good too, man. With that said, I want max RPM for drag street with 4,000 converter, 410 gears, has Edelbrock high ram, 85 Holley Terminator. Okay. Nitro fever. I only use GM heads. I think it's a disservice to the platform to use aftermarket heads. Really? The aftermarket industry, I think, would think differently about that. Best heads for high RPM, 4.8, 7,500 peak power. A stock head on a 4.8 will easily rev to 7,500. Overhang of the head chamber to bore is what I was getting at. You don't need a dyno, but it helps. Just an air fuel meter. That's all you need. Just make sure that part of it's right. And then the air fuel actually is less critical, I would argue, than the timing is. And timing, especially on boosted stuff, guys get timing wrong all the time on that. Boosted lawnmower. If you take a look at some of the stuff that we did, like the 5.3 that we went to 8,000 on. What do we put on there? We ran trick flow or airflow research 230 heads on that, but that was a bigger bore motor. That was a D-stroke LS3. The motor that we have now, the 5.3, the stock bottom end 5.3, runs to make peak power like at 7,700 because it has a really short runner intake manifold on it. It has the BTR stage 4 LS3 camshaft. It has those ported trick flow 220 as-cast heads. There's lots of good stuff. And on a 4.8, you're just not going to be taking advantage. You're not going to make 600 horsepower. So you're not going to be taking advantage of what those heads have to offer anyways. But all of those heads will be good. You have way more cylinder head than you can utilize probably on that combination. Overhang of the head chamber to bore. We don't need a dyno, but it helps. If you already have a 4.8, the benefit would be not having to buy another motor. That's true. If you already have it, then you have it, and that's good. Then you should just add boost to it. I would consider the short stroke a benefit. It's not a benefit. I mean, you're not limited by stroke, and your RPM is not at all limited by stroke. Like I said, the 5.3 has the longer stroke, and we're running that to 8,000. So that's not a limiting thing. I mean, maybe eventually somewhere there might be people are concerned about piston speed, but not in any of the RPM range that we're talking about. 4.6 Rover V8 with mini-me heads. The 4.6 Rover V8 with the mini-me heads are the perfect test of high velocity. So you think that those are the some sort of optimum combination of flow and size and velocity for power? If you're spending any money at all to build a motor, an hour or two a day of dyno time is cheap insurance. It is really. In a stock 4853 that uses 799 heads, does the combustion chamber actually extend past the edge of the bore? Sorry if this is covered. Yeah, it is. It does overhang it. A 799 bore, the inside diameter of the combustion chamber is bigger than the bore size on a 4.8 and a 5.3 block. I have visions of fixing my billet crank and making a 402 stroker. What's your power goal? How much can the motor survive? What's the intake and valve size limit on a stock 706 head? I don't know. I've never tried to go to the biggest valve I can put in there. I'd look for a rotted out donor vehicle. Why are the center lines on cams for Hemis versus others so much wider? I've never looked at cam cards on aftermarket Hemi cams. We have to fix some wires too. I saw a couple brittle wires. That's not good. Not rev higher, but less stress. Yeah, I don't really think that that's a thing for what we're in the range that we're talking about. The RPM thing and the short stroke thing is a Formula One thing, and not a 8,000 RPM thing where we're at. Boogie fever. Scrolling. There were several 2500s on there today. Do you know what potential flow I could have by having 317 heads floated? I've seen them go like 315 or 320. We used a set of ported 317 heads on the Big Bang 6-liter. And a set of 225 heads. I'd compare the cost of porting 317s versus buying aftermarket heads. Yeah, and the problem with porting 317 heads is they still don't have a good combustion chamber design. So if you're putting a lot of work into them, think about that. But like I said, we made a lot of power with those. Cam I was looking at was a 598, 604, 232, 236, 108. Is it a 108 LSA or a 108 intake center line? Summit makes LS3 heads that flow good, but don't cost 42 million. It might not be filled with engine displacements and theories. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff rattling around in there. Are 806 heads on my LS1 worth porting, or should I upgrade to a better head to get 450 horsepower? Yeah, you can port any of the factory heads, and everybody has CNC programs for all of the factory heads, and then all of them will respond to porting and bigger valves and chamber work. Should I just change heads into what would you put on that motor, Troy? Troy, it's hard for me to keep all of the things straight here. Did see a cool video by Auto Guild that explained all the heads pretty well and name drop Richard. Wow, I'm famous. Fuelie heads are magic. Yeah, exactly. And if you go back old school enough, Bill, then it's power pack heads. Snowing in Florida, 38. Yeah, it got into 30s, 37 or something, somewhere around there last night, but it's 61 and sunny right now. What's the cost of bore and sleeve 5.3 to 427? Yeah, we've done aluminum 5.7 blocks and gone to 468 inches. I don't remember what it cost though. Darton did it. I'm sure it's a few $1,000s. I have an LQ4 short block, ported 243s, larger valves, fast, cams at 236. Should I worry about balancing a factory crank when using Summit Pro LS rods and pistons? Yeah, the Pro LS rods and pistons, unless they specify that they're a drop-in rod compared to the factory stuff, the balance is definitely going to be off. Great discussion, Richard. Still going to the beginning of the live. One question for you. Does running, let's say, an LS7 size head gasket on a sub 4-inch bore cause any issues outside of just less compression? No, we've run bigger gaskets, but it does do that. I don't know if that would make it more or less detonation prone, but it does lower the static compression. Sometimes we've had to do that at WestTech when we don't have the right size bore gasket that we want, and we just run a bigger one. We're like, look, we just wanted to seal the combustion so that it works, so that we can make some runs. 649 each, Summit Chevy LS cylinder head. Yeah, I've seen those. Those are the offshore ones. About it, what the deck thickness is. Brian Nutter from Summit told me what the deck thickness is on those. It's not as thick as some of the aftermarket ones. I want to say it's a 1/2 inch or 55 thousandths and not 3/4. Cam is 232, 248 exhaust, 120 lobe separation angle. Where's your horsepower be? Kenneth, is this the one with the big heads on it? I don't have any idea. I don't have a lot of experience with the Hemi stuff. That's not a very big cam for that cylinder head, I can tell you that. Comment was split up last time, but large head, small bore, the 202 valve on my 402 bore engine wasn't close enough to be shrouded by a 4-inch bore. Flow is the same. Does a 706 flow more on a 6-liter? I'd have to go back and look, Dave. That's a good question. I don't remember if... I'd have to go back and look and see what we flowed all of those on. What size flow fixture we flowed them on. If I was any good, I would have flowed them on both. But, it's me we're talking about. Have you heard anything out of the gentleman that won the Nova and put the diesel in it? Yeah, it has a small block Chevy in it now. Cam suggestion for 10-to-1, 355 Vortech head air gap. For David, for a daily driver, it'd be a 218, 224 or a 224, 230 kind of comp, like extreme energy cam for a small block. If it has Vortech heads on it, I'm making the assumption that it's a late model hydraulic roller block, but it doesn't have to be. And even if it is, you don't have to run a hydraulic roller in it. You can run a flat tap in it. Running 7.5 inch tall Mancini 4500 intake on alcohol, my first Hemi. Okay. That doesn't seem like nearly enough camshaft for what you're doing. Tuning mapping is easy. If the engine goes bang, you can pretty sure you didn't do it right. I missed that one cell by 8 degrees. 7 degrees in sloppy central. That means my Omni is really cold right now. It'd be nice to have some cheap, decent LS3 equivalent heads that had a nice thick deck. Mike and Scott both, those heads that Summit sells don't flow as well as stock LS3 heads do. I'm certain of that. This is a 426 cubic inch, 13.5-to-1 diamond piston Molnar crank. Yeah, 230 cam doesn't seem like enough for that kind of head flow. I'm looking at this build LS using an RHS block and heads. It's rated for 2,500 horsepower on boost. I've heard nitrous is harder on internals, but horsepower range would be maxing out the bottom end. I don't know. I don't know where that block moves around at. But yeah, I would be more apt to do it on a turbo or our turbos than I would on nitrous. Nitrous is going to be harder on it. Which of the stock LS3 heads that you've tested do you think would work best on a 383 stroker made from a bored out 5.3 and 4-inch crank? I don't think you can do that. I don't think you could put LS3 heads on there. because even a 5.7 bore like a 3900 bore is not going to fit an LS3 head. Has Cleveland style mains. Yeah, I've run RHS blocks before. We ran the tall deck that we made a 500-inch motor out of it, and they work good. I just don't know where I remember talking to Brian about this, and I thought that there was some reason that they were not using the RHS blocks on some of their 388 stuff that they were doing, that they were making beyond 2,000 horsepower stuff with. The impeller is worn. Should I rebuild the P1SC or replace it with a different blower on a built Forge LS1, 10-to-1 compression, LS9 cam, street only? I don't know. Does it still work? I mean, an LS9 cam is not a very big camshaft. It's going to be pretty soft down low, especially when you team it with the centrifugal supercharger that is also soft down low. Some racing expert. Scrolling. Man. It's still going back. Holy moly. Precision Cast has a 4-250 deck thickness. Okay, so even smaller than I thought. I just want to get you to do a rover test with an M90. Yeah. If you haven't run it, I have 243 heads and flat top stock, still running them. The turbo will have to pick up my slack. Yeah. Danny, your 862 heads are good. Same as a 706 head. Tonight, you're making me feel really good about getting 1 or 2 of the motors done. There you go, Ralph. Go get them. Reality and NA race engine capacity limited by our 6-liter class 425 bore and stroke is the only way to win races. Valve shrouding is the enemy. Okay. Yeah, if I was doing racing where I wanted to have more head flow, I would do that. But that's not what we're talking about here. I guess it depends on how much power you want to make. Bet it flows well enough. I thought that they were in the 2. I don't know. It wasn't over 300 though. You can go over 9,000 with a 4-inch stroke LS, and the bottom end won't be the weekend. Yeah, that's not it. Looking for a 5360 in the junkyards. Go pull them before anyone else gets to them and resell them for 10 times as much. That seems like a lot. Scrolling. LQ4, 862 head, Trailblazer SS, low buck truck cam, will 36-pound injectors be enough? Yeah. Somebody multiply 36 times 16. I don't have my calculator here. Rolmas. Yeah, multiply 36 times 16. That will give you an answer. Can't do that off the top of my head. 16, 360, and half of that, 180. Yeah, you're fine. I think. 360 and 180, 460, 540. Yeah. Yeah, you'll be okay. I have 6-inch lifted, 35-inch tires. Yeah, Gray Squirrel, cam and springs are normally the things that guys go with. You'll need injectors too, because the cam adds so much power. Or turbo. But you can go to richardholderperformance.com and then take a look at the low buck truck camshaft for that. That would be good for that kind of truck, a bigger, heavier truck. Has anyone had trouble with head alignment dowels on small block Chevy not being straight? Removed old ones that the machine shop reused, getting ready to install new ones. Sometimes they don't go in straight, and then sometimes the dowels are knurled up, and the head doesn't want to drop on. Sometimes you got to tap them down. Can I change my poll to no? Yeah. If you just log out and then log back in, then you get to vote again. I vote for a D1 head upgrade. Flow test the heads on large and small bore for the answer. Bore shrouding kills flow. I already know the answer because I've already done that, and we know how much it changes it. But the point is that if you have one head that flows 240 and the other one that flows 320 on a 4-inch bore, and even if it comes down to 300 on a 3780 bore, you still got 300. Yeah, Scott, I don't know about that. If our forks are 210s for $750 each is not bad. Yep, those are good. A Darton would be at least $3,000. Yeah, assuming you have the block, but I don't know these days. Stuff could be even higher. I'm doing well. 4 degrees in Quebec, up in La Canada. I've always worried about what might cause hotspots or weird quenches or something. I don't know about that part of it. Like, I'd like to see that level of OEM testing to see that kind of weird stuff. Indiana has been cold. Seriously cold. Curious about the sleeves. Maybe build a backup motor. Got to run the correct hoods for any build I'm doing. There you go. 55,000 was actually pretty good. I do not know flywheel numbers, but it makes 330 wheel horsepower. Runs 1280s. Runs 1280s at 170 miles an hour. Probably not that much mile an hour. Richard, small block Chevy, best stock cylinder head you can get is a VORTECH. What is the best stock big block head you can get? Probably the later L88 ZL1 head, but it's going to be really hard to find. Get an open chamber one. Not sure if you've seen it, but one of the Proline Hemi engines actually notches the sleeves to make clearance for the valve. Yeah, we were talking about that. The big block stuff did that too. That's engine number 3 in the Nova. Yeah, he's swap drop. 241 heads can be ported successfully and make good power. Yeah, Oliver is the guy's name. 862 heads race roar are good. What today's cold weather? Is there a way to test air temperature differences in detonation and power potential on the dyno? Yeah, the power potential for temperature is a known factor. The detonation thing I'm not sure about because there are multiple things that work there. I remember seeing this on a test on intercoolers where they lowered the charge temperature and it raised the cylinder pressure, and then that could lead to detonation. And then it's the same thing with air temperature. That's a possibility, I guess. You'd be eliminating the higher temperature reasoning for detonation, but cylinder pressure detonation would be something else. And then we would have to have a discussion about pre-ignition and then detonation and all of that. What cell torque converter would you recommend for 1,000 horsepower 5.3 with a 7875 turbo? I would base that off of none of those things. I would base it off the camshaft and the intake manifold. It's the one with the big head. They're rated at 440 at 700 lift, but can't go 650 on the springs. Okay. Has anybody made a billet LS 4-cylinder chopped in half LS? I haven't done that. Running 706 with 706 heads, LS6B have springs, and a 551 lift cam. That's fine. Those springs will do that. Nitro fever. My 862 has developed an external crack. I thought that 706 heads were the cracky ones. Do you do any Gen 3 Hemi stuff? Yeah, if you take a look at the channel, I wrote a book on Gen 3 Hemi stuff, and I have done lots of testing with it. I just don't know about any of the high level stuff that you're talking about, particularly those heads. Head flow matters the most at 65 to 70% of valve lift. Lobes spend most of their time there. Yeah, they're sweeping up and back. They only have peak lift once, but they're sweeping up through the lift range twice. And so it's way more important. Yeah, the LA SCR $6,000. Yeah, well, you ask about the best stock ones. I wouldn't consider any stock head to be good, not compared to what's out there from the aftermarket. Some rec ports flow 307 and 315. Really? Maybe it's their 243s that I'm thinking of that didn't flow as well. No, blue collar, I was making the 170 mile an hour thing up. Be interesting to see a compound turbo with a GT45 and a massive turbo just to see what drive pressure does. Sloppy stage 2 cam Trailblazer SS. A D-stroke 5.3. A D-stroke 5.3 is just a 4.8. But de-stroking it doesn't allow it to run 10,000 RPM. But a 10,000 RPM with turbos on it would be cool. But we're not going to get there with de-stroking, though. I think compounds would be best for a low-flowing motor, like a stock motor. What do those larger numbers mean? Like 702? What heads are we talking about? 781s? Those are the ones that we're talking about were big block Chevy heads. And the 700 lift ones were the Mopar guy. Have you played with exhaust and merged collectors on LSs like NASCAR Modified did years ago with adding firing order cylinders into each collector? I haven't changed camshafts and then also played with different merges relative to firing order. We have done tests of different style headers, 4-into-1s and the tri-Y versus 4-into-1s, and then different collector extensions and collector designs and stuff like merge collectors and things. I remember an article where Lingenfelter built a 496 with 049 heads. I had 049 heads and then ported versions of those 049 heads on a big block that I did long ago and that we ran a bunch of blower stuff on. They work good. Sloppy stage 2 cam Trailblazer SS. What would you recommend on a stall converter? Probably a 2800. Is this on a, Danny, what size motor is this on? Is this on a 5.3? If it's on a 6.0, you probably could get a 2500, but it's on a 5.3, I would do 2700 or 2800. Yeah, dirt merger. We were talking about that. He asked about what the best factory big block head was. And so we steered him towards an L88/ZL1 head that's gold. I want to find the RPM limit on a 4.8 with a well-balanced, high-quality internals. Curious to see what the mechanical limits would be. Okay, you should do that. The thing that you'll find is that you'll have a very, very expensive valve train setup, and that the block and the crank and the rods and stuff will not be the really expensive part. Does an 8-in-1 exhaust do anything more than sound unique? I've not seen power changes from that. I never tested an 8-in-1 on the engine dyno. We see a lot of them on the chassis dyno, but I haven't seen any sort of test where somebody has showed me that that's worth lots of power. What's the best resource to look into learning how to port factory heads? There's lots of head porting stuff online, so I would search there. And then there are some books. David Vizard has some really good stuff depending on which engine family you're talking about. Is a blue collar 990 is going to be like a 291 head, right? Best torque converter solution is to swap the box out for a manual. That gives you the stall that you want, right? Would you run TFS 225 heads designed for a 6-liter bore size all on your 5.3? 54% saying yes. So we'll end our poll, and we have 1 minute. 49 heads, oval ports, 990s direct ports. Yeah, the 291s were the heads that we used on the 375 horse 396, because I think that's what we had available, and also on the LS6. Nathan, turbos would be better. They would make more power. And on that note, it is time to go. But I will be back tonight, later, not too long. And then we're going to take a look at the dyno results, and everybody can yell and scream about different stuff. You can pick the cylinder head that you like. But we will be back tonight.